All right. Well, Frank, McCourt, thank you so much for taking the time to join me today in this conversation about Project Liberty. Um, so what I'm going to do is start off a little bit about bigger picture, level setting a bit about my background as it ties into potentially our conversation today. So sort of level setting on that with a bit of a soliloquy, and I apologize for this in advance, but for context, I've been in this space, so the blockchain space since 2011, and that starts way back when with Bitcoin, and for better or for worse, then led to 2017 with creating tokens in this space, which I never sold. And then I've designed NFTs, so those non-fungible tokens several years ago, and now I'm working on a DAO. As a technologist, my view has always been to try to understand stuff, so unpack it, almost break it, and then try to fix it, which is both positive and negatives, provides some challenges, and I know that maybe we'll get into in a second. But that's one side. The other side is growing up in DC that I had to learn early on about the broader implications of what we consider now as a tokenized world. So the effect of this new world order, and in some respects, on people, society, on governments, on businesses. And I've been talking about this for, I guess, the last 6 years, going back to 2016. And in my travels around the world, you get different perspectives. Coming back from Dubai recently, you have a organization or a government that's really pushing the limits on some of these spaces, but there's clearly some issues there as well. Last point that I really love to hopefully frame up here is ultimately what I see is that's happening is that we have sort of a battle royale, and that battle royale is pitting these old school businesses, which are only 10 to 15 years old, that have highly centralized social media platforms where they collect as much information as they can possibly collect, uh, really for their own gain, right? So we're offering up all this information and then they're able to do whatever they want with it. That's one side. The other side is Web3, which is this idea that I know you know very well, and we're just about to get into, is that individuals can own their own data. And then what can you do with that? You can possibly sell it, you can maintain it, you can make sure you have control over that. So with that as a background, Frank, I'd love to hear more about what the problem Project Liberty is trying to solve at this stage.
Well, Joe, it's I really appreciate the your framing here. I think you've done a really nice job at setting up what's going on and what's at stake here. And the problem that Project Liberty is addressing is trying to come forward in a world where there's a lot of people recycling on the problem and talking about the problem, and quite frankly, becoming a bit disillusioned because of the problem. Project Liberty is coming forward with a solution, an idea, an innovation, rather than rely on solely on others, right, to solve the problem. For instance, regulators or policymakers, and so on and so forth. It's I like the way you kind of teed this up as this moment between the world of Web 2.0 and the world of Web 3. And I really like to think of this as a really key opportunity, an inflection point to actually transform how the internet works. Going back to the internet in the early 90s, when I refer to the internet, I should define what I'm talking about. I'm talking about Web 2.0, the World Wide Web, the ability for all of us who have access to the internet to be connected, right? And that's the same version of the internet that these big platforms that you referred to have exploited, right? To really extract your and my and everyone's data and do things with it. So we'll get to that in a moment. We're at a moment now where there's technology available to actually have a different type of internet, not just an internet of data, which is what Web 2.0 is, but rather an internet of data and value, which is what Web 3 provides. So, and when I say Web 3, we should probably talk about terms a bit, because I think people throw different terms around, and quite frankly, it's so nascent that we all may mean different things by it or hear different things. When I say Web 3, I'm talking about something bigger than just blockchain. Blockchain is a part of Web3. It's a tool that's now available that wasn't available when Web 2.0 was designed. Very powerful tool. But there are other things that comprise Web3, including protocols like one that we've been working on called the Decentralized Social Networking Protocol, DSNP for short, which is not tokenized, which is a core internet protocol, which would work just like HTTP works, which is what we're using right now on this Zoom call. So the internet itself works based on simple core protocols that we all have agreed to adopt and use, and that connects us. It doesn't have to work the way it works now. We can adopt different protocols, new protocols, and the internet would work differently. And Project Liberty's intervention and innovation is focused on the social graph rather than have billions of atomized graphs, which is our digital DNA, our individual DNA, our relationships and so forth, which is what is sucked up by these big platforms and then monetized. What if we could have a universal decentralized social graph? In other words, all of the data we create would sit as part of the internet. It would be part of the public utility. And then new apps would be built, have access to that data, but on a permission basis. So you and I would give permission to the new apps to use our data on terms that we set. And this is, again, a feature of Web3 and blockchain, something called smart contracts. So the ability for us to actually flip entirely the way the architecture works, so that rather than click on these cookies, agreeing to terms that I've yet to meet anyone who's read them, and giving up our data and our rights to these huge platforms. What if we had a world where we set the terms and the new apps click onto our terms, right? And they use our data in a way and manner that we prescribe. And by the way, if there's value created, we share in that value. So we're entering a new era of technology, and which means we have the opportunity now, knowing the power of the internet and what it's capable of. Very few people knew that 30 years ago. We do now. Let's give everybody a mulligan for the mistakes made in the past, but no mulligans a second time, right? We need to fix the internet now so that it works in a much healthier, fairer way for people and optimizes for society and optimizes for people, not for a few platforms. So this is what Project Liberty is about. And what I want to add is one last point, and that is Project Liberty is not a tech project per se. I think coming forward with a solution that doesn't have a tech component or track is a non-starter. So we do have a very powerful tech idea coming forward in Project Liberty. But this can't be just new technology taking over old technology. This can't be left to the technologist once again to design the tool that affects and impacts all of us. This needs to be designed by society, by civil society, by people that have expertise in how governance should and does work, embed values and ethics into this new design of technology, engage civil society, engage the policy-making apparatus so that they know that there actually are innovations here that would fulfill policy objectives. It's not just, we're not stuck with just having to somehow constrain these huge beasts. That's not, we don't have to be resigned to do that. The internet does not have to work the way it works. We can, using technology and advances in technology, we can have it work differently. But this time, let's not leave it to technologists alone, and let's engage civil society and experts in governance and the policymaking apparatus. So Project Liberty has 4 tracks: a tech track, a governance track, a policy track, and a movement track. So it's really not a tech project, it's a democracy project.
Fantastic. So yeah, I think we all need mulligans every once in a while. God knows I used to always need them when I played golf many moons ago with my horrible slice. But I'd love to hear a little bit more about those tracks, because as you've heard in the beginning, first and foremost, I see myself as a technologist, so trying to understand the technology, but clearly with this technology, it needs to have a much broader perspective on what you're looking at. So could you go down the road a little bit on each one of those aspects, please?
Yeah. So let's reflect on uh, a little bit further as you started to do when you opened this conversation on the path we've come down on our journey to date. So early 90s, World Wide Web is developed, and then in the mid to late 2000s, the smartphone started to show up in everybody's hand. The connectivity just exploded. And we all had this incredible tool in our hands, right? Essentially a supercomputer connected now to internet, where we're all connected. But we skipped a big step, I think. The mantra at the time, you'll recall, was coming out of Silicon Valley was move fast and break things, right? And by the way, that's exactly what's happened. And big things are breaking right now. That to me was irresponsible. So this time around, let's move fast, but let's fix things, and let's not leave it to technologists alone. So the tech track is, as I said, does come forward with a very powerful idea about a decentralized social networking protocol and a number of use cases that are not ad driven built on it. The governance track, which was not even considered in the move fast and break things era, is bringing the social scientists to the table with the technologists. So now you have social scientists and computer scientists together, not leaving it to one or the other, to really understand the impact of the technology on our governance models and on a human behavior and how things operate. So bring that expertise to the table while the tech is being designed and integrate the two. Thirdly, go ahead and be engaged with the policymaking apparatus. That's regulators, policymakers, elected officials, and so forth, so that they're aware of the developments that are happening in the world now, in the world of technology, and see what's available as a new redesigned internet that would actually fulfill the very policy objectives they're looking to achieve, so that we're not relying on regulations which may or may not work. By the time the regulation is passed, the technology has moved beyond it, or people just don't abide by the regulations. Regulations are no match for the speed of technology. Democracy is no match for the speed of technology. We need to innovate, but the regulators and the policymakers need to know what's on the horizon and what's possible. And then the fourth track is the movement making track. And what we're talking about there is, and I really should be more specific, because movements don't get made, they happen, right? But what Project Liberty hopes to do is connect lots of movements out there, fuel, let's say, a movement of movements, really, of engaging civil society at this key moment in time to actually come together behind a project that's constructive and unifying. I think it's been far too long that since this country's had a unified project, something where we all can be for the project and for building something. I go back to Kennedy's speech about the man on the moon in the 60s, and how that was a galvanizing moment. And we got behind that project. And all of us who were alive at the time remember where we were when Neil Armstrong stepped on the moon. And that was just a first step. That project has been providing dividends for humanity ever since. We've just all seen the images from the Webb telescope a few months ago. And by the way, all of the things that we rely on now for, like miniature chips and the mini computer and GPS and so on and so forth, where it came out of that space exploration program. So we're benefiting from, after more than 50 years from that project. It had a huge impact, not just on this country, but on the world. And it was America shining. America's innovation shining. So think of Project Liberty as a similar project for democracy, the next generation of democracy. And I feel that, as it turns out, the technology and reinventing and redesigning the technology will turn out to be the easy part of this project. The much more challenging part will be engaging civil society and getting people excited about the possibility.
No, that's it. And that what you just perfectly stated was, from my vantage point, which sounds very similar to yours, is that all those components are amazing. But when you get down to it, and the movement aspect of it, it's trying to help people understand why. Why would I do this? And then part of it is understanding the education around the technology itself. People, quite simply, and this is fair, I think fair to say, this idea of ownership of your own data and how that's done and what I need to do as an individual to be able to help get involved in that space is somewhat complicated. Because what we're talking about fundamentally is, and I'd love to hear more about what you're thinking here. So the tech sometimes with Web3 is around like a digital wallet. So having a digital wallet that you then control the keys to, so the password to. And when you have that data that you then own, it's very different than what people are used to before, because that means you have to control that. You have to take care of that in some form. And how do you educate regulators around this without them getting nervous about, okay, well, huge organizations are going to be very upset because it's counter to their business model. So how are you going to battle that versus then the ideas around ownership of data, which also means ownership of their own money and what other currencies are out there. AML, so anti-money laundering, knowing your customer, KYC, all of those things sort of pop up when we start going down this conversation, in my personal opinion. Have you encountered that? Any pushback on that level?
Yeah, I think the that to me that's second level pushback. And if you're talking to people that are very familiar with Web3 and very familiar with blockchain and wallets and so on and so forth, you can get to that conversation fairly quickly. But I think we're at a much more, we need to have a much more important conversation. And that's the before we get to the detail and the nuance and so forth. And that's a conversation about the current tech architecture and is it working or not. I think more and more people are understanding that the current tech architecture is so broken and so flawed that it's actually doing incredible damage to society. And whether or not, whether you're an individual who has had their data stolen, bank account stolen and been ripped off, whether you're a parent and are super concerned with your kids and their mental health because of what social media is doing, whether you're someone like myself that just loves this country and is a citizen and is frightened when they see what happened on January 6th and just this anger that social media foments and amplifies, and so on and so forth. There's many different ways that people, or whether you're just an individual that realizes now your data has enormous value and you're not participating. Somebody else is getting all that, taking your data and getting all the value. There's different entry points here, but I think that there's a growing awareness that the current structure is broken and unfair, and it's doing a lot of damage. And quite frankly, it's really stealing people's data and is exploiting people. And that is not a democratic concept, right? If and in this whole idea of a surveillance economy and a surveillance society where we're surveilled morning, noon, and night, and our data is taken from us. And it's not just when we're on social media, it's when we're shopping, it's when we're searching, it's when we're walking down a city street, it's when we're driving in our car, it's when we're on a smart device in our home. We're now having all that data, which is ours, taken from us and exploited. It's just fundamentally wrong. And there's huge value in that data when aggregated that should be shared, in my opinion, with the individuals who are producing the data. If you really zoom out here, Joe, and think about technology and what it means in our lives right now, when you have a centralized technology, data of individuals scraped and aggregated and exploited by those centralized platforms, where they optimize for whatever they decide to optimize for and assume that's time online or stickiness. And it turns out that making people angry and outraged gets them to stay online more. So you're optimizing for rage. And now we see with recent transactions at one company where one individual will decide what the governance model should be. That sounds very autocratic to me, right? Imagine a world where the technology is decentralized, individuals have agency, i.e. ownership and control over their data. The platforms are, the governance that's embedded is by real experts, right? Who understand the impact at scale of technology, and where we're optimizing for trust and truth and democracy. That sounds a lot like democracy to me. And so my thesis, Joe, is that you really can't have a democratic society with autocratic technology. You can have an awesome autocratic society, right? If you're an autocrat, you like nothing more than having 24-hour-a-day surveillance of your subjects. They're not even citizens at that point, and be able to control them and what they think and what they see and what they do and how they're triggered and how they're manipulated. But that's not the place I want to live. So I think we have something that's fundamentally broken, needs to be fixed. This new wave, this new generation of technology gives us the opportunity, if we all engage here, we can fix it. And this time we can't leave it just to the technologists.
A great point all around. Absolutely, totally agree with you on so many different levels there. The part that I am grappling with and have been grappling with for years is, how do you convince the Twitters of the world, the Googles of the world, the Facebooks of the world, even the Amazons of the world, that it's in their best interest to do this, because they are completely and totally incentivized by having that power, having that control. How is that brought to them and they get on board with that? How, I just don't see how that's possible. I'm trying to figure it out.
Well, I think that was the battle royale that you were defining, if I understood you correctly.
100%.
And I think it's up to these big platforms to decide what they're going to do. And but we know the current situation is and the architecture is broken, right? We know that there's it's not optimizing for people, right? And we have now ample evidence of that. And by the way, not everything about the internet is bad. The internet is awesome. For the fact that we're all connected and that we can actually solve big problems together, and we have data that can be, that when we look at it, we can see what's working and what's not, and we can cure diseases and solve problems and so on and so forth. It's tremendous. But that shouldn't be happening where the data is all going to a few platforms, and they might decide to optimize for the right things or not. I don't want my government going to big platforms and getting data, right, that was not permissioned. I'd rather have my government ask me, hey, there's a new novel coronavirus and we'd like to track it so that we can stop it stop it immediately. Would you be willing to share your data for that purpose? And I can say, yes, I will share my data for that purpose and that purpose only, not for all purposes. And I'm not going to go through a middleman to do it. This is the beauty of decentralized technology and what is possible on the horizon. So I think that this is a moment where we can really solve these problems. I don't think this should be left up to, whether big tech agrees or disagrees. I think it's up to big tech to acknowledge that the current architecture has very serious shortcomings, and that scraping and exploiting people's data without, and using it in permissionless ways and not sharing the economic benefits is just not, that has run its course. People now know their data has value. It's time for a new architecture. And by the way, these big platforms can transition into this new world and be beneficiaries, because after all, they're big companies, right, with big balance sheets, or not. And it's up to them to decide whether they're going to transition. Otherwise, new companies will be built that are more, that people understand that these new companies are better for them. They're sharing in the value that's created. It's healthier for their teenage daughters, and it's not getting us into these polarizing arguments with family members, friends. It just, where we have this almost this massive argument going on, and it's like, let's stop it. Let's stop that, and let's get on the same page. We're Americans, and let's go build something together. It shouldn't be up to whether big tech goes along with it or not. Big tech should decide they're going to transition to a healthier internet now that we all know what's going on. And like I said, it's not about pointing fingers. Let's give everybody a mulligan, but not the second time. So big tech either comes around and is part of building out this new architecture, or they become dinosaurs, because new things will be built that people will use. By the way, the apps that are built in Web3 will be just as polished, even more so. They'll be just as easy to use, even more so, in this and that. I think the fundamental issue here is people understanding that their data is theirs. It's their digital DNA, and they should decide what to do with that data. And if they decide to share it for commercial reasons, they should participate in that transaction. It's very basic. Joe, in the early 90s, my family built a telecom company called RCN. And at the time, we were up against the oligarchs of that era, the baby bells. And we wanted to build a new telecom. And we were the first ones in the world to actually bundle, to give you the option of having phone, cable, and internet, which was very nascent in '93, from one provider. And we were putting, brand new squeaky clean fiber optics in the ground. So you had high-speed internet access, broadband. It was a great product. And people came to sign up. And at first, very few did. Why? Because they wanted to keep their phone number. And we couldn't give them the phone number because the oligarchs of the time said, we own your phone number. And people were so attached to their phone number that they wouldn't go to a company and sign up to another telecom that they otherwise would have. When the Telecommunications Act was passed in '96 and people's phone numbers became portable, and in other words, you own your phone number, you can take it with you where you want. Now choose the carrier based on whatever. You have agency. You choose which carrier based on strongest signal. They give you a free phone. They bundle. They do whatever it is. Less expensive. And then our company and many others took off. Now, I have a question for you. If people were so interested in owning their phone number, don't you think it's just a matter of time before people get interested in owning their data, which is 1,000 times, 10,000 times, 100,000 times more valuable than a phone number? It is massively valuable. We're creating data every minute of every day. And if the phone number was so important, I think when people understand that in this modern age, their social graph is their phone number, and it should be theirs, and they should go with it. They should take it where they want to, and use it and allow apps that are built like phone carriers. They're the same thing. Let them pick the ones where they like the terms, and they think it's better, and they're more comfortable. And I think that's where we're moving, and I think it's gonna actually happen very fast.
I couldn't agree with you anymore, because quite honestly, what it comes down to is whether people believe it or not, the metaverse is coming. It is real, depending on what that actually looks like. The bottom line is that people are going to need to own more and more of their own data, because what you're talking about is even more data that's coming in, whether it be an NFT representation of a digital contract, could be your digital shoes, it might be Nike, it might be a purse that someone has. Now, if you have ownership of that, you'd like to carry it from one place to the other with the interoperability, that's a big component of it too. But yes, so it's fundamentally more of our data is digital, it's online. And so for people to have control over that, that's a significant thing.
May I say something about interoperability?
Sure.
Yeah, it's funny that you mentioned that word, because back in the early '90s, when we and others simply wanted people to own their phone number, so that our upstart company and others could give it a shot and hopefully thrive, right? we heard a lot about how, it would be very difficult for the interoperability of the time was one carrier, not having the walled gardens of the time where a carrier had kept you in that walled garden because they had your phone number, right? They owned it, right?
Right.
Now, we heard, wow, what's going to happen here? It's going to be so difficult to have the phone number work between, what is now Verizon and AT&T and T-Mobile and Sprint. Well, guess what? When the Telecom Act was passed and people had, and data portability became a fact of life, wow, interoperability was solved pretty darn quickly, right? And it was from a technical matter, a non-issue, right? I mean, obviously things had to be done, but it was very easily solvable and was solved. And now, could you imagine living in a world right now where you were stuck with one provider because you had to have more than one phone in order to go
Right.
to, different providers? These are market forces. This is innovation. And what I'm saying is, in this new world, the apps will be interoperable. So you won't be stuck on one platform because you have to be on that platform to talk to people who are on that platform, right? It's like your phone number. You're stuck with that carrier. No, your data, the apps will be interoperable. And so as long as somebody in another app gives permission to share some information with you and vice versa, it's like making a phone call to somebody, they have to pick up on the other end of the line, right? There's a connection made. Well, imagine that happening at massive scale now, because we're living in a world where our social graphs we're connected to many, many people, and they in turn, those nodes are connected to many, many people. That's the power of the network effect. When the apps are interoperable and we have agency over our data, then we have the modern day version of what happened in telecom, and we have a much healthier internet. And this data happens to be way, way, way more valuable than phone numbers. And I think once people realize that, they'll see that there's a huge, huge new possibility on the horizon, which is coincidentally much healthier for society, much more in harmony, in sync with democracy, right? Agency and truth are, let's call it, shared set of facts, trust, and agency are the three building blocks of democracy, right? We used to have that, a shared set of facts, different opinions, of course, and we trusted one another and our institutions. And we had choices. We could vote for this or not do this, or we could engage. We had our independence, our freedom, our liberty was really held in an exalted way. Now we have technology that is completely messing up our shared set of facts, right? Between mis and disinformation, there is no shared set of facts. The platforms are not optimizing for trust. As a matter of fact, optimizing for rage destroys trust between individuals and at a societal level. And we have no agency because our data has been taken from us and is being used. So to feel like we have no control is a very rational reaction right now. And we need to restore that agency so people are back in control again. And again, it doesn't mean I'll always make good choices. That's not the point, but they're my choices.
No, great point. So picking up on one of the things you brought up, it was about new platforms. Who pays the bills on these hypothetical new platforms? How does that work in this new world?
Well, I think it works on multiple levels. So, first of all, there's a new tool available, and a new called tokens. And so, in this new world, the users, those involved in these platforms and the growth of these platforms, benefit because the value of the token increases, and the users get tokens, particularly the early users, right? And so there's actually an economic sharing that goes on that doesn't happen right now. Imagine, for instance, that the trillions and trillions of dollars of value in these 4 or 5 biggest tech companies was shared 50% between the users and 50% between those companies. They'd still be massively rich, but imagine all that wealth being distributed to the people who are actually creating the value, i.e. the generators of the content. And I'm not talking about just creatives who are, creating things on the internet. I'm talking about just people whose data is being, they're creating data like we are right now, So that's, we have a new tool. Also, subscriptions, ads, and so forth. I'm sure there'll be new models of that. And those subscription models will be one where people are deciding, okay, I'd like to go ahead and subscribe to this app, just like you subscribe to a phone carrier, right? And you say, I'm going to use this one versus this one because of what it provides for me, what the exchange of value is. And thirdly, there may be ad technology that is used in Web3, but it will be used with transparency as opposed to the way it is now. And individuals, rather than being targeted and being shown ads and led in directions that were being exploited and manipulated, will signal our interest in something. So if you want to signal your interest in a pair of running shoes, the internet will still be there. People will be connected. You'll get information on what you want at that moment, and can even participate in that transaction if your data has been used. But you'll get what you want when you want it. But your data then won't be taken and used for some other purpose that you didn't permission. Remember, part of Web3 and what's evolving now and decentralization is, for the first time, storage is also decentralized. So we don't need these big companies that have these big server farms with all this information residing on their servers, and they get to decide what to do with that data. Now, what is much safer, much less hackable, much more powerful is the data being stored in a decentralized way. That's what decentralization allows. And so now we have a safer system, and one where we can all be connected without relying on some middlemen to have control, to own, quote unquote, our data and control it and manipulate it. This is a huge opportunity if we get it right. And again, it should not be left just to technologists to sort through.
Totally understand. Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. It's funny because when I talked about the sort of decentralization of cloud to something called IPFS, so Interplanetary File System, going back 5 years ago. Yeah, there's many out there, right? People's minds were blown. It's like, wait, that means I can actually rent out my hard drive space. Let's say I keep half of it open. I can rent it out. Anything that's saved to it is encrypted. I can't get access to it, but other people can get access to that. And then you can make the entire world, any device that you have, part of the cloud. And you would get paid for that. And people are like, what? No, it's only supposed to be for Amazon or for Microsoft. And I'm like, no. You can actually monetize this and make something of it. It's a great point that you brought up there.
And that would be an example of another protocol like DSNP that would be a primitive, that would be a part of a new architecture that should be designed and is being designed so that the internet, it works in an entirely different way, because now the tools are available. And by the way, just like other technology, which was, and we heard all of the problems with blockchain, right? And unfortunately, oftentimes the first movers in these spaces are people that do not have good intentions, that are charlatans, that are looking to scam people and so forth. But by the way, same thing happened with Web 2.0, if you recall.
Always that, yes.
All the dot-com boom and bust. But unfortunately, the narrative right now, people are confused because they look at blockchain and say, geez, it's these, these dodgy coins and these silly NFTs and this and that. And I think it's really important that we kind of reset a bit and say, no, blockchain is a powerful tool, a powerful piece of technology. Those coins and those tokens and so forth are use cases, early use cases. And yes, some of them were, and some people did try to take advantage of other people, and that's a shame. But that happened in the early 2000s as well, right? And And the point is that even when in the early 2000s, when people were taken advantage of and we had the dot-com boom and bust, the core underlying technology was being built and emerging, and it turned out to be hugely powerful. Well, the core underlying technology, including blockchain, is being built out right now, and it's going to be very powerful. This time, let's get the social scientists and civil society engaged in this conversation, because this is an awesome tool, which if used and optimized for the right thing, could solve many of the problems we're dealing with in the world right now. On the other hand, if we don't fix social media and we don't remove mis and disinformation for the most part, right, which the new technology will allow by having digital identity and verifiable attributes and privacy control and so forth. If we can fix the tech, we can start solving other problems like climate change. If we don't fix the tech, we're not even going to agree whether climate change is an issue or not, because we, again, don't have that shared set of facts that we all rely on, and then we develop our opinions, and we're entitled to different ones.
Frank, I don't think we could end on a better note. Thank you so much for this. I could ask you a ton more questions. I'd love to engage with you more on this, but I know that we're short on time. I really appreciate your perspective and what you're working on. It's fantastic.
Well, I appreciate your interest, Joe, and I would just urge your listeners to take a look at projectliberty.io, and there's plenty of ways to get involved. And again, this is not be a huge mistake for people to think I'm going to solve anything alone, right? This is not a project that's one person or one company. This needs to be a project where we all get together as citizens and really fix this. And I think it could be a great project for all of us to really kind of rebuild that muscle of working together and really being behind something together, and which I think would be great for this country I love. So thanks for your interest, and we welcome others to become engaged and get involved.
Wonderful. Thank you again. Really appreciate it.
All right. Take care, Joe.
All right.